It's my honor to present Marvin Zas.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack, for this kind introduction. And yeah, I just want to state before I even start, it's really an honor to be here at Black Hat 25. And I met a lot of cool people, having a really great time, and I hope all of you are doing the very same. Yeah, with this, I would like to welcome all of you to my journey of fault injection countermeasures, the TrustZone-M architecture, as well as defeating both the aforementioned by using my very own multiple voltage fault injection hardware design. But maybe, first of all, who am I actually to talk to you about fault injection? So, my name is Marvin Zas, and I'm a graduate in the field of IT security from Technical University Darmstadt. My expertise is mostly in embedded system security as well as low-level software security. And back in Darmstadt, I've been working for quite some time now for a really awesome research team, which is referred to as the System Security Lab. I have the great privilege to work with highly intelligent people over here. And just in case you are around the corner, just reach out to me and let's see what we can break together. All right. And this brings me to my motivation. So kind of a central question which we have been asking ourselves was, well, how secure are actually these highly secure labeled embedded processors when it comes to multiple fault injection? And in order to evaluate this question, we had to develop a novel and especially a cheap way of injecting multiple faults. Because I have to state here that, well, commercial setups which are dedicated to multiple laser fault injection already exist. However, these come at such high cost that it is practically infeasible for private security researchers to afford them. And yeah, let's now have a quick background on fault injection attack, a quick history basically, and we will have here a strong focus on voltage fault injection. So the complexity of voltage fault injection attacks increased until the point we are right now. Researchers started back in 1997, I would say, by injecting rather simple voltage faults as we know them today. And well, these were very simple and hence had a low success rate and a low reliability of the overall attack. Quite early, it has to be said, Barengi et al. Introduced two fault injection countermeasures on the instruction level, which are used to mitigate fault injection attacks. However, in this work, we are going to see how their approach can be broken by using our multiple fault injection approach. At some point, Colin O'Flynn joined the game, basically, and introduced to his crowbar circuitry to perform voltage fault injection attacks. This has shown to enhance the reliability of single voltage fault injection attacks. Christian Kudera utilized this crowbar circuitry of Colin O'Flynn and injected voltage faults based on a negative voltage level. This has shown to increase the timely resolution of our voltage faults. Other researchers went another way, namely Bozzato et al., and what they did is to literally shape the glitch by using digital to analog converters. And yeah, by this, they have shown that the reliability of a single voltage fault injection attack can even be enhanced. Most recently, we've been observing a vast amount of different work which has been proposed, which utilizes different onboard regulators to generate this faulty environment. And this is a really important step because we are starting to get away from this physical access threat model, which is commonly the downside of fault injection attacks as well as side channel attacks. And we are starting to get towards an even remote fault injection setup, I would say. Really important work. And probably the most related work to this one has been the work proposed by Roth et al. And what they did is to inject a single voltage fault in order to attack the TrustZone-M. However, at this point, the authors did not realize that there were additional protections on the internal AHB bus available which successfully mitigate their attack. And well, basically here we are right now at Black Hat 25 to show you how to inject up to 4 consecutive faults in order to fully break the TrustZone-M architecture. And yeah, if you would like to know how we did this, stay tuned. All right, another part of my motivation was basically this yawning gap between different adversary models in the field of IT security in general. And this gap even enlarges whenever we talk about hardware security because we are just really dependent on different tooling over here. To the left, you see a lab which is quite similar to this I'm currently using. And well, I assume that this looks familiar to at least most of the hardware-focused security researchers who attend this call. It just has to be said, our labs are not beautiful, in fact, but they suffice our daily purposes. To the right, you see the Focus Ion Beam lab of the ultrastructural bioimaging core facility of the Institut Pasteur in France. And based on such a Focus Ion Beam, you could, for example, go ahead and alter the doping of a single transistor inside your integrated circuit even after it has been produced, which is just crazy, you know? And if you are like me, which means your affiliation goes in the direction of this left lab over here, well, we are incapable of performing similar attacks. And what we commonly have to do is to improvise in order to reach our goals. And improvising is exactly what also we did within this work. So let's now discuss a quick background on a background which is required in order to follow the rest of this work. And here we are going to focus, first of all, on fault injection, and afterwards reason about why the TrustZone-M architecture cannot be overcome by using single fault injection attacks. All right, so fault injection methods in general concern rapid changes in an integrated circuit's environment in order to cause a specific and exploitable misbehavior. In the past, mainly 4 different types of fault injection techniques have been used, which are clock fault injection, electromagnetic fault injection, optical fault injection, or laser fault injection more specifically, as well as voltage fault injection. And due to the use of analog components, which are referred to as phase clock loops, or PLLs in short, these clock fault injection attacks to the left must be considered impracticable as of today. And in fact, I would like to use this opportunity of public speaking to officially declare clock fault injection as being dead. This leaves us with basically 3 promising candidates to perform single fault injection attacks. And throughout this work, we are going to focus on voltage fault injection for reasons which we'll discuss once introducing to multiple fault injection. For now, let's just see how voltage fault injection is commonly performed. All right, so here you see different voltage ranges depicted over time. The green range indicates that we are within our specified operating conditions, whereas the red range indicates that we have left our specified operating conditions. What you commonly do in voltage fault injection is you keep your supply voltage in the specified range for most of the time. Once a synchronizing trigger is asserted high, an internal counter starts counting upward until the specified offset has been reached. Once this offset has been reached, we inject a transient fault, and by this, this fault is parameterized by our width parameter, and yeah, afterwards just continue as intended. All right, let's now see what we are capable of doing once we found us some proper parameters. And this is perfectly described by our fault model. So the fault model for voltage fault injection states that a single voltage fault to be injected mainly affects our internal processor's pipeline stages. This means, to the right you see an exemplary load modify store cycle based on the ARM architecture, and this is supposed to illustrate the implications made by our fault model. So once we go now ahead and inject a single voltage fault, we could, for example, corrupt instruction fetches. But we could also go ahead and corrupt data loads or corrupt even data stores. But finally, and what is most commonly utilized, we could skip over the execution of a whole instruction. And throughout this work, also, we are going to focus on the skipping of instruction due to its deterministic nature, basically. And in this context, we define our fault target as the instruction which we'd like to skip. Such a fault target is assumed to be hit whenever we successfully skipped over its execution. All right. Let's now have an exemplary fault injection attack. For this, assume there is some kind of a memory mapped register which is critical to your secure configuration, for example. Exemplary firmware to write to this register may look like the following. We first of all load its address, afterwards move a value which we'd like to store, and finally restore back this value. Let's unroll this execution and talk about voltage fault injection. And what we would like to do here is to skip over the assignment to this memory mapped register. So this store instruction over here represents our fault target. Now, once executing this load instruction, we keep our voltage supply in the specified range. Same holds true for this move instruction. However, once we come close to our fault target, we inject a transient fault, and by this skip over the assignment to this duplicate register, to this memory mapped register. All right, due to the criticality of fault injection attacks, well, several countermeasures have been proposed by academia, and these are mainly divided into instruction-level countermeasures on the one side, as well as hardware-level countermeasures on the other side. What you commonly do in instruction-level countermeasures is some sort of a duplication-based approach. So, well, for example, you perform some computation, perform all the same computation all over again. Afterwards, you check both your outputs for equality and check them both for equality again. And it should be easy to see for you at this point that whenever we skip a single step of this procedure, well, the corresponding other step would still be able to detect your fault injection attack. All right. On the hardware level instead, we would commonly have to deploy physical sensors along our integrated circuit, and afterwards use these physical sensors to constantly monitor our integrated circuit environment. I'm telling you all this because it's quite interesting to see that these instruction-level countermeasures to the left have made it into recent microcontroller units. All right, and I think, or in my opinion, this is a great step in the right direction. However, we are going to see how to break them. So here are a couple of examples taken from different datasheets from NXP of these duplication-based approaches. As an example, this one is supposed to protect against malicious attacks, whereas this one is supposed to provide a better protection against malicious hacking attacks, such as glitch attacks. Yeah, you get the basic idea, right? And a question I was asking me when going through this datasheets was, well, how does this actually prevent fault injection attacks? So let's have another look in this. You now deploy 2 memory mapped registers instead of only 1. And exemplary firmware to write to these registers may look like the following. You load the address of your original register, which is on the top. You move a value you would like to store, and you finally store back this value. You execute some stuff in between, and do the very same for your duplicated register, basically. All right, let's unroll this execution again and talk about voltage fault injection. And what we would like to do here is to perform the very same attack we've been performing before. So this store instruction over here represents our fault target. Now, once executing this load instruction, well, we keep our voltage supply in a specified range. Same holds true for this move instruction. However, once we come close to our fault target, we inject a transient fault, and by this, skip over the assignment to our original register. Now, as we are capable of only injecting a single voltage fault, well, all these other steps would still be executed as intended, and at this point, we introduce an inconsistency between our original as well as our duplicated register. And this inconsistency is then going to be detected by your processor, which basically locks itself down into some erroneous state. So a question I was asking me here is, can these instruction-level countermeasures be evaded by simply injecting multiple faults? And if we think about injecting multiple faults, well, which fault injection method shall we choose? So let's reason about this. In order to implement multiple fault injection, we need a fault injection method which is, first of all, basically alive, right? Clock fault injection is directly out. So we also need to be capable of injecting faults in a rapid succession. And the problem with electromagnetic fault injection is that after each fault injection attempt, you would have to recharge your internal capacitor, an internal capacitor bank, basically, with a lot of static current, and this just takes too long. Also, we would like to be as cheap as possible, right? Just have a look at our lab over here. I mean, we obviously got no money left. So the logical consequence would be to go with voltage fault injection, at least for this work. All right, let's now introduce the TrustZone-M architecture. And due to time constraints, I won't be able to provide an in-depth knowledge, basically, around the TrustZone-M architecture itself. And instead, I'm going to focus on the question, why can the TrustZone-M architecture not be overcome by using single fault injection attacks? And by this, we'll basically trade brevity for precision. And in case some members of the ARM family are watching this talk, well, I hope you guys can forgive me. All right, so let's just assume you get your ARM v8M core up and running. And this core is now capable of splitting your 32-bit address space into basically, well, secure as well as non-secure regions. Let's just keep it like this. And how the separation works is as follows. There are 3 components involved, which are forwarded every address your core accesses during runtime. And these are the memory protection unit, MPU, which determines the privilege level which is required in order to access your this address. And then you have your secure attribution unit, SAU, as well as your implementation-defined attribution unit, IDU, which both determine the security state which is required in order to access this address. Well, the final security state is then determined by just choosing the most restrictive output of both your SAU as well as your IDU. All right, we are in a memory-mapped architecture, right? Which means we have a bunch of components, basically, which are mapped in our address space, and these are interconnected by using some kind of a central system bus. In ARM-based systems, this bus is referred to as the Advanced High Performance Bus, or AHB in short. Now, based on the configuration of this SAU and IDU, our core could now, for example, go ahead and define our RAM and our flash as being non-secure, and our peripherals as being secure. Whenever our core is now executing in a non-secure state, well, it could only access these components which have explicitly been defined as being non-secure. And once our core is executing in a secure state instead, it could additionally access our secure peripherals in this example. All right, now problems arise, however, when we attempt to introduce other bus masters, because these have commonly not heard of TrustZone-M before. And well, if you think about directly attaching them to the internals of your HB, well, this would totally break the security introduced by your TrustZone-M architecture, actually, because this could arbitrarily access your secure as well as your non-secure secureable HB slaves. All right, what has been done to fix this is the following. We first of all introduce what we call a gate here in front of every our secureable HB slaves. And these gates must be provided in addition to the address, our security state as well as our privilege level. For our bus masters to generate this required sideband information, we would have to differentiate now between two different scenarios. In the first one, we have a TrustZone-M aware bus master, and in the second one, we have a TrustZone-M unaware bus master. All right, for our TrustZone-M aware bus master, the solution is quite simple because we could just directly go ahead and provide the required information to the internals of our AHB. Whereas for our TrustZone-M unaware bus masters, well, it's slightly more complicated. Here we first of all have to introduce what we call a wrapper unit here, which then, based on its internal configuration, is going to generate this required sideband information and provide it to the internals of our HB. All right, let's now see what previous work has been doing. So previous work injected a single voltage fault into the configuration of the SAU over here. And based on this fault injection, well, a single non-secure region was to be expanded whenever the IDU in conjunction stated that this region was in fact non-secure. All right, now the authors did not realize that there were these additional TrustZone gates available on the internals of our bus. And at this point, I hope all of you see that whatever we are going to attack over here is afterwards to be detected over here. So unless we are able to, well, inject another fault here, there's actually not much we can do. And this is perfectly stated by all the different datasheets. I'm going to read out loud this example of an NXP datasheet here. So if some inconsistency is detected between the SAU and the HB secure controller configurations due to some software error or glitch attack, the access to a specific resource is blocked. That's a lot to take in, actually. And yeah, well, we can now conclude all this by saying, in order to fully break the TrustZone-M architecture, well, multiple fault injection is definitely required. All right, let's now see what we decided to go with to implement multiple fault injection. And here you see our setup, a photography basically of our setup. However, at this point, it's rather unimportant, to be honest, because this is on a level which we would like not to go into. Let's just instead discuss our abstract setup. And in this, we basically have three different components. We first of all have ourselves basically, or the controlling host system. We also have this multiple fault injection platform and our device under test, which has implemented some kind of a security measure, which we would like to overcome. And now we can go ahead and communicate with this multiple fault injection platform via USB. And by this, for example, set the number of voltage faults to be injected and the corresponding parameters. In this example, you see a cooperative setup because, well, there is some target I/O going on. And moreover, the synchronizing trigger signal is directly asserted high by the device under test. However, our multiple fault injection platform could also be used to attack non-cooperative setups, basically. All right. So now, whenever the device under test, in this case, asserts the synchronizing trigger signal high, our multiple fault injection engine gets triggered, and by this starts to inject multiple voltage faults based on its provided configuration to break the security implemented in this device under test. All right, let's now have a deeper look into the internals of our multiple fault injection engine. In order to understand how we decided to implement multiple fault injection, however, it is first of all important how to generate a single voltage fault. And here you see a single voltage fault injection unit. This is provided a reference clock signal, and whenever a trigger signal is asserted high, well, an internal counter would start counting upward until the offset, which is an input here, is reached. Once this offset has been reached, the fault out signal is asserted high for as long as we have, for exactly with number of clock cycles. All right, and once all this process has taken place, our fault down signal is asserted high for a single clock period in order to indicate that the single voltage fault injection has taken place. Now, if we are talking about multiple voltage fault injection, well, it's obvious that we need multiple such single voltage fault injection units, right? The question is, well, how to combine them actually? And it turns out to be quite simple. We can just directly forward this fault down signal into the subsequent one's trigger signal. There's the downside with this design, I have to mention. Well, this is a static setup basically, right? We cannot really change the number of voltage faults to be injected after our hardware synthesis took place. So what we've been doing instead is to introduce two additional multiplexers on these forwarding lines. And once we set the selection line to 0 in this example, the multiple fault injection just starts with the most recent voltage fault to be injected. Whereas once we set the selection line to 1, our subsequent single voltage fault injection unit gets triggered, and based on this starts to inject another voltage fault based on its provided configuration. So in conclusion, we could say, due to these multiplexers, we are able to change the number of voltage faults to be injected even after our hardware synthesis took place. And maybe one more thing at this slide here. Well, why are we actually chaining our single voltage fault injection units, right? We could just, for example, try to utilize multiple triggers. But this is wrong, because we would like to be able to actually search for parameters on a cooperative setup and then afterwards transfer these parameters to a non-cooperative setup, which means we have a need of a minimum amount of synchronizing signals here, right? Okay, bear with me. Let's now see what we decided to go with to perform our search for parameters, basically. Okay, and I would like you to recap that for every voltage fault which we try to inject, we have to find basically two things. First of all, we have to find an offset with respect to our timely invariant trigger signal. And then we have to find a proper width in order to hit our fault target. All right, now what is commonly done in single voltage fault injection is that you just go ahead and combine all your parameters, basically, some kind of a brute force approach, right? And this is what it looks like on a physical level. Here you see for a given offset that we try out different widths, basically, and then continue to the subsequent offset. All right, if we would now go ahead and directly apply this approach to our multiple fault injection platform, well, you can see that this already takes some time to only search for basically two parameters, right? And if you now imagine, well, you would have to search for maybe like 3 or 4 different voltage fault parameters. Long story short, this is getting impracticable. All right, and in fact, we can show that each additional voltage fault to be injected increases the overall search space by exponential means, which is basically the definition of impracticability, right? So we have to be better than this. What we decided to go with is to differentiate between different hit fault targets. And this differentiation may take place, for example, based on a clearly distinguishable behavior upon partial success, or a change in the side channel emanation upon partial success, most commonly by using just a cooperative setup. But as I said earlier, you can then go ahead and transfer these parameters you found by a cooperative setup and transfer them to an even non-cooperative setup, right? And yeah, basically anything you can imagine which helps you differentiating between your different hit fault targets. Now, once we are able to differentiate, we are able to perform our advanced search, which goes like the following. So first of all, we define an overall success function, which determines whether or not all of our fault targets have been hit at once. We then go ahead and define partial success functions, which determine whether or not a specific fault target has been hit. We now utilize a single voltage fault to sweep through all our search space, and by this also record partial successes with respect to our partial success functions. All right, now, because we have previously been chaining our single voltage fault injection units, we would have to translate the parameters we just found into relative ones. Quite simple here. A problem arises, however, because we do not know how a previous voltage fault to be injected affects the succeeding one's parameters, basically. And in fact, this cannot be decided because we are leaving the specified operating conditions. Guessing would be totally wrong at this point. And what we've been doing instead is to generate very small intervals from our parameters, basically some plus minus delta, so to speak, and use these small intervals to throw them into our integration stage, which then performs some kind of a combined brute force on all these small intervals, right? This is the first stage where our overall attack is performed for the first time. And hence, we do not care too much to evaluate our partial success functions anymore, but instead we only evaluate our overall success functions at this stage. All right, now in our evaluation stage afterwards, we just check for basically repeatability and reliability of the previous attacks. So quite simple. All right, let's now see what we are what we can basically do with this, right? Let's break some stuff, basically. So here I'm going to focus on, first of all, breaking these duplication-based approaches, which I've introduced earlier. And afterwards, I'm going to show you how every TrustZone-M architecture out there can easily be broken. So bear with me. Duplicated registers, as we see them in our background section, basically, these are commonly used to protect any security-critical configurations in your system against fault injection. And we have found them to be used in, for example, debugging features which determine whether or not you have debug access to your core, or physical unclonable functions, basically, any system security configurations, and, well, yeah, this is a non-exhaustive list, right? All right, let's make an attack plan to attack these. And I want you to remember that we now have two registers mapped into our memory space, which are referred to as our original register as well as our duplicated register. Under normal circumstances, we would commonly go ahead and assign both of them the very same value in a sequential fashion. So first of all, our original register gets written. Afterwards, we write the very same value to our duplicated register. The attack plan, hence, looks quite simple. We actually just skip over the assignment to this register, and afterwards skip over the assignment to this register. All right, let's now see the results of our sweeping stage, basically. And this is what it looks like. But maybe some preschool math first here. So our multiple fault injection platform is running with a frequency of 100 megahertz, which means in turn, we have a period of exactly 10 nanoseconds, right? And this means that a single step along the x-axis, which depicts our voltage faults offset, and the y-axis, which depicts our voltage faults width, is exactly equivalent to 10 nanoseconds. All right. The grayish crosses show these results where we injected a single fault and basically nothing ever happened. The red one, I've labeled them here stupid crashes because we commonly do not want to encounter them, right? If we cause a crash, well, we have to reboot our target, and this just lowers our throughput in fault injection attempts. In blue, you see where we successfully skipped over the assignment to our original register, whereas in green, you see where we successfully skipped over the assignment to our duplicated register. Let's now arbitrarily, or maybe semi-arbitrarily, choose some values from these intervals to perform multiple fault injection. So let's go with this one here because there are no stupid crashes around. And, well, why am I actually choosing a much narrower width for the second one? Any ideas? All right, let me tell you why. Because this is what it looks like on a physical level. And after we are done with our multiple fault injection, you see that there's a really slow recover curve, right? We are slowly recovering from our multiple fault injection attack, basically. And yeah, well, internal as well as external capacitances would have to be recharged at this point. This, however, is the original voltage level even before we injected a single fault. And this is the voltage level after we injected a single fault and before we are about to inject a second one. And as you see, this is only roughly half the original voltage level. So if we would now go ahead and inject a much wider fault, well, we would unnecessarily stress our target device and by this cause a lot of crashes. All right, so in conclusion, you could say that you would have to take care of this whenever your fault targets are not reasonably separated in space. Okay, let's see some results. And these are really amazing, I couldn't believe it. But first of all, what are we seeing here? The x-axis is an exponential scale which shows you the number of fault injection attacks we've been performing. And the y-axis is a linear scale which shows you our success rate in percent, basically. And as you see, it's really crazy. We seemingly converge around a success rate of 70%, which is really a lot because if you read single fault injection papers, well, they always state like, we have maybe a success rate of 20% or 30%, but this is rather high, to be honest. And what we did here is we injected multiple faults even and get a success rate of 70%. Okay. So I hope you all agree that this countermeasure is in fact broken. Let's now see how to attack the TrustZone-M architectures out there. And here I'm going to show you an attack which works on all these processes which are in the heading over here. So first of all, we would have to go ahead and skip over the activation of this SAU. Oh yeah, and to the top right, don't worry. This is just meant to provide a reference in case you are already familiar with the TrustZone-M architecture. If you are not, just ignore it. So first of all, we skip over this SAU activation over here. Afterwards, we have to skip over these additional backchecking mechanisms on the HB bus. And finally, we would have to perform some sort of privilege escalation, because we just deactivated the TrustZone-M, and we can't make any transitions to non-secure at this point. So yeah, this is basically it. If you are like me now, however, I just have to tell you, all these targets broke down, you know? And the STM, for example, it broke down like every 30 seconds. The M2351 broke down like every 5 minutes, and the SAML11 took him some longer. He broke down like once in an hour. And I assume that these differences arise due to maybe imperfect parameters. However, the parameters are still sufficient because we successfully broke them all. And if you are like me now, however, this should make you happy, but this, you know, just doesn't make you happy actually, because, well, we have been developing this super sophisticated, let's just coin it this way, super sophisticated multiple fault injection approach, you know. We have developed this advanced search basically, and now really 3 faults is all it takes. It's so depressing, right? But you know what? Thank God there's NXP. I really love them. They are my favorite IC manufacturer. And what they did is they additionally protected these trust zone gates to the right by using these duplication-based approaches. So instead of injecting only 3 faults to attack these trust zone implementations, we would have to inject up to 4 voltage faults here. First of all, same as before, we skip over the activation of this SAU. Afterwards, well, we skip over the original register of this trust zone gate over here. Afterwards, we skip over the duplicate register, and by this, fully deactivate these additional backchecking mechanisms. And finally, we perform the very same privilege escalation as before. So you see, let's see some results actually. So we inject a single fault over here and regain a success rate of roughly 45%. Let's inject both of them, and we got a success rate of 2.5%. 3 of them, we are with 0.23%. And if we perform our overall attack against this TrustZone-M, well, we have a success rate of roughly 0.0003%. You may wonder, why is there such a huge drop in between our 3rd fault target and our 4th fault target, actually? And this is because, well, NXP decided to activate their brownout detection in between our 3rd and 4th fault target. So by this, we additionally successfully glitched over the brownout detection of NXP, which is also, you know, nice to have. All right, and if you now think, well, this is not a real attack, you know, 0.0003%, that's almost nothing. Let me tell you, in our experiments, we have been encountering successes in an average time of half a day, all right? And it took at most 1 day. Let's just say by saying 1 day. And if you think about the consequences, so the implications made by this attack, this must be considered critical actually, because once we are done, there is no trust zone left actually. There is no secure, there is no non-secure. There is just basically me owning all your precious secret data, you know? And yeah, so even a success rate of 0.0003% in this context must be considered critical actually. All right, let's now conclude with some possible multiple fault injection countermeasures. And a little teaser here. Well, shall we maybe implement them on the instruction level? All right, so in case your answer was yes, I would like you to leave this room right now, because you have obviously not been paying attention. We definitely want to go with hardware-based countermeasures, right? And Intel, as an example, Intel just integrated them in their 12-gen processors. Yesterday, there was a great talk here at Black Hat which just went about this, the configuration of these countermeasures on the hardware level. It's great, Intel. Props to you, really. And I've been in contact with quite a lot of embedded IC manufacturers, and all of them stated that they are working on, well, let's just say similar countermeasures, basically. You could now go ahead and ask, well, what about these devices which are security critical and which are already on the market? For these, I would strongly...
5 minutes, Mr. Sass, 5 minutes.
Okay. For this, I would strongly recommend you to use these duplication-based approaches and, well, combine them with random delays, because we have only been able to perform our sophisticated search approach, basically, because these fault targets are always in the same location, right? Timely location, basically. All right. So here are your main takeaways. Multiple fault injection can be implemented rather cheap by using voltage fault injection attacks. Such multiple fault injection can then be used to, for example, break instruction-level countermeasures as well as the TrustZone-M implementations out there, and basically any kind of interdependent security measure. And I just have to state that I would like to optimize our parameter search because I would like to get rid of this differentiation-based approach and go towards an even more independent solution. I couldn't figure it out yet, so in case someone has a suggestion, I'm definitely open to it. And yeah, finally, we would like to thank NXP for their really exceptional engagement in our responsible disclosure process. And yeah, thank you.